Charlie, it didn't happen for Ron DeSantis, your governor down in Florida, and a great governor, I think, by all three of our standards. I've listened to you over the past year, really hopeful that he could do it. The audience knows you don't like or want Trump, and then sort of wrestling with some of his failings on the campaign trail. And now, it's like the 5 stages, right? You get to acceptance. There's the bargaining. There's the denial. Now there's the acceptance. I think there are a lot of Republicans who are probably feeling what you're feeling right now. Just sadness and disappointment. Here we go again. We had this guy who probably would have been a great executive, but he didn't have the charm, the charisma, or run the greatest campaign, let's be honest. So now, having had the benefit of a few days after his announcement to look back on where he went wrong, if he went wrong, right? If it could be blamed on him at all, how are you seeing his campaign and how it ended?
Well, I say up front, my primary objective in this campaign season was to see Donald Trump lose. Now, had the primaries come to Florida, I would have voted for DeSantis. We had a debate at National Review quite early on, and Michael Brendan Dougherty wrote a piece essentially saying we should put all of our chips in behind DeSantis. I was on the side of not doing that because you never quite know how people are going to pan out. That's one reason you have primaries. So you're right to say I think he's a very good governor of Florida, although I have been critical of him in some ways. It wasn't as if I was DeSantis or bust. I'm anyone but Trump, really. But I think DeSantis made a couple of big mistakes, leaving aside the elements that he can't control, such as that he's short and isn't especially charismatic, doesn't really like campaigning. Those things matter, right? I mean, they do. The taller candidate tends to win the presidency. It's been like this for a long time. But he made a couple of mistakes. And the biggest mistake that he made, in my view, as a Floridian, is that he forgot how he's seen in Florida and why he won so big. He won so big in Florida because he was not regarded as anything other than a normal politician. In the country at large, he was turned into this football, a piñata at times. But in Florida, that's just not how he's seen. He has a moderate record on the environment. He's really into cleaning up lakes and saving manatees and making sure the Everglades are still there in 100 years. Although he has taken on the teachers' unions, he raised teachers' pay twice. He is really good at the bread and butter of politics in Florida, much of which was laid out for him beforehand. The state has no income tax. It has no tax on capital gains. There are constitutional prohibitions on raising fees. But he did all that really well, and he absolutely crushed the number one responsibility of a Florida governor, which is hurricanes. I think it's the best hurricane response I have ever seen was Ron DeSantis' last year, actually 2 years ago now. And then he went on the campaign trail and he talked in this strange online language. Everything was about racism. Everything at his launch, which didn't work, the Twitter launch. He talked about Chevron deference, very dear to my heart. Probably not the first thing you mention when you're running for president of the United States.
That's a Supreme Court case in which they're going to decide how big the administrative state should and can be. Keep going.
Right. And I just think that was a big mistake. Now, I think, as I've said many times, that he was probably not going to win because Trump distorts the electromagnetic field. He's just a remarkable figure, a sui generis figure within our politics. But I think DeSantis would have had a better chance if he had talked about things that most people care about, which is the economy and crime and, yes, education, but did so in a less esoteric way or in less of a way than you would expect to see on Twitter. And I do think that was a mistake. It's almost as if he saw himself becoming a cultural lightning rod, and he saw himself regarded as sort of something outside of the American mainstream, and he decided to run with that. But that's just not how he was seen in Florida, and he won by 20 points here as a result.
There's been a debate now about whether he should have been touting the anti-woke thing, Casey DeSantis's jacket, where woke goes to die, Florida. You guys are not woke. I'm not woke. I count myself as an anti-woke warrior and loved everything he said. But I can see the question about whether that should have been the thing he ran on. That, as you point out, Florida's thriving. And, Trump had some tweets, Rich, about how, it's thriving under other governors too. Jeb Bush is really the one who saved Florida. It kind of runs itself now. But Ron DeSantis really changed the voting patterns in Florida, and for a good reason. So he had some things he could have bragged about on the economy, which is the number one thing people care about. Maybe woke plays a 20% role instead of an 80% role, which is how it felt.
Yeah. So first of all, I think you just can't underestimate how the performance ability plays in national presidential politics. And there's not one thing anyone can remember that Ron DeSantis said that was funny the entire campaign, right? Maybe the closest I can remember, the CNN town hall he did with Caitlin Collins, and it was after Nikki Haley had messed up her name, called her Caitlin Clark, who apparently is a fantastic college basketball player. So DeSantis came out with the Caitlin Clark jersey to give to Caitlin Collins, which was sort of light or funny, but it was making fun of Nikki Haley. It wasn't making fun of himself. He had a lot of material to use self-deprecating humor, or even after that horrible last debate, he goes with Anderson Cooper for the interview afterwards, and he seemed relaxed. I mean, it was like a transformative thing to see him relax. I don't know what was going on, but he talked at the end about his 5-year-old kid being in the front row in the whole debate and making it to through the entire thing awake. So why didn't he start that debate saying, here's my son, I don't know his name. She's sitting on Casey's lap, and this is the most important metric for me in this debate, whether I'm succeed or not, whether I can keep him awake or whether he's going to fall asleep on me. But that's not his repertoire. He doesn't even think of doing it. And it's the most important quality of a president? No, but it's a really important quality for people to identify with a political candidate. Now, overemphasizing the woke stuff, yeah, I think in retrospect he did. I don't think it was crazy what he was trying to do at the beginning, and it went to the big strategic theory of the campaign, which go to the middle of the party, not the middle ideologically, but the middle in terms of feelings towards Trump. MAGA people who are kind of soft on Trump and in theory persuadable to be moved away from him, and convince them that DeSantis is pure and more of a fighter on this cultural stuff than Trump is. And, Trump is not really into the trans thing. Abortion, he's obviously been much weaker this time around. But it's just impossible to convince people that Trump is soft on cultural stuff because he's such a cultural symbol himself. And then you get the indictments. If these people are movable at all, maybe they just weren't. But you get the indictments that bond them to Trump. And then his theory was, I'll get these people, these soft Trump voters, and then I'll establish such strength, all the non-Trump people, and they're not a majority, so I got to worry about these people first. The 20 to 25% never non-Trump people will just come to me because they have to. All the other candidates are flaking away and dropping out. So then I have maybe a winning plurality. And that works on paper, but he couldn't get the soft Trump voters. And then Nikki Haley vacuums up the non-Trump voters. And that's why you're 20% in your strongest state in Iowa and 5 to 10% everywhere else, and just done. That's
such insightful analysis. I totally agree. He has a sense of humor. When I went down there to interview him in Florida, he like the dinner itself that we had the night before was off the record, but I will tell you, he was telling stories that had us rolling. There was an amazing story he told about a particular U.S. senator who went in front of Trump when Trump was in the Oval Office, which I'm not at liberty to repeat. But in telling the story, DeSantis did an imitation of Trump that was the best. I mean, it was among the best imitations I've heard. And he did it with gusto. He didn't half-ass it. And it was great. I had a smile from ear to ear. I was genuinely entertained. And it got me thinking, how they used to, in the law, they used to say, and I'm sure you guys have heard this, you hire the A students from the top schools to write the appellate briefs, and you hire like the C students at the second and third tier schools to actually get in front of a jury, because those are people who were smart enough to get into law school and make it through law school, but they're more likely to be people persons. And DeSantis has had this stellar resume career, right? With like the Yale and the Harvard Law School and and then went right to the JAG Corps. I mean, he's been building the presidential resume from the time he was, 17. And I do think that probably makes you risk averse. If you're not a natural people person, your inclination would not be to press past your veneer. It would be like, everything I've done has gotten to me what I've achieved so far. Yeah. I should not let down any of these defenses, Rich.
Yeah, so just a couple things. I know Troy probably has thoughts on this too. But it's hard to there's only a certain level at which you can manage a presidential candidate. But what they should have done, every time you said something funny in private, that someone should have written it down, and some material they can't use, right? you're not going to mock Trump that way, or you can't talk about the senator by name. And then have them try it out on the stump, and stuff that's funny. You're a public performer, Megyn. You do speaking. Once you have a joke, that's gold, right? People love that. It makes you more relaxed. If people laugh at something you say that's intended to be funny, it bonds people to you. It makes them think better of you. Just use that, and then you have 10 things you can work in. But apparently, and this all goes to the top. He's just uninterested in it. And I'd never heard your theory, but I think that makes a lot of sense. And then the last thing, that thing about doing something wrong, and the A student worried about the misstep because he'd never made one in his life. This was a key thing. One reason people associate Trump with strength is he's fearless. He's not calculating what he says. At least you can't feel the gears whirring around in his head, right? He'll say anything about a judge. He'll say anything about a clerk sitting next to the judge. He'll say anything about other candidates. He'll make up nicknames. But both Haley and DeSantis, you could always feel they were calculating every line. That debate they had must have been the most rehearsed, non-spontaneous debate ever. I doubt any of them actually ever said anything they hadn't thought about beforehand or written down beforehand. And that feels weak. It feels insincere. It feels inauthentic. And this goes back to Charlie's point that DeSantis, he didn't run quite as DeSantis, right? He's a conservative, and he believes all the anti-woke stuff. But this isn't quite, who he is. And people could feel that, I think, and that hurt as well.
What do you make of it, Charlie?
I mean, there's a paradox here within democracy itself, in that we're all sitting around and we're describing his ability to perform. But the job he's running for is mostly not about performance. I mean, if you look at DeSantis's record as governor, he's an exceptional executive. He's the sort of person you would want to be in charge of the federal government. I mean, leave aside for a moment. Sure. Leave aside for a moment whether you agree with him or not. Just look at his executive ability. If he had left-wing politics, people on the left would, I think, be able to see that he is good at being an executive. But he's not really interested in the stuff that you need to do to be able to become the executive. And so he can't get there. And I don't think he was ever interested enough in changing that. And so he's probably not going to take the next step. It's quite rare you do get both. And you have people who are really good at running for president. They're really good at the campaigning stuff, say Barack Obama. Not a great leader. You probably have to go back to Ronald Reagan, to someone who had both and who picked it up over years. I mean, Rich said, when you have a joke that lands, you keep it. Well, Reagan had 50 years, since he was 10 years old. He'd been telling people jokes. He'd been through a job in your union. He'd been the governor of California. He'd been a spokesman for General Electric. He'd been an actor. He had every joke at his disposal. During that time, he also managed to turn himself into a fantastic executive as well. Ron DeSantis had one in spades. He didn't have the other. It is a bit strange, though, how much we prioritize the performance quality. I'm not saying that we're wrong, because clearly DeSantis didn't make it. He got 20% of the vote in his best state. But it's a bit frustrating, I must say, as someone who's lived in Florida and seen what DeSantis has delivered, to read piece after piece accurately describing what is wrong with him, none of which actually has to do with the core job description that he was seeking.
Can I add two things? One, to emphasize the point you're making, Charlie, and one to add a caveat. So just what you're saying made me think the two best communicators in Republican politics ever were Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan, both of whom were hilarious, who were funny, had an endless store of jokes and stories. Like for any circumstance, any situation, they could use it to deflect certain things when they're being pressed or to emphasize a point. So I think this humor is really important. And Trump, not in that way, Lincoln and Reagan did, but he's funny. He's funny. And I'll just add, you need a good executive to be president. Obviously, it's hugely important, but performance is important. I remember, at least an element, you need to look sad at the right times when you need to be sad, strong when you need to look strong, even if you're not feeling it. And George W. Bush, once we were meeting with him in the Oval Office, and he was talking about, there's a big thing. He doesn't read the newspapers every day. What's wrong with him? He's an idiot. He's not well informed. He's like, I read that stuff and it upsets me. It makes me feel under attack, and if I do that, people, when I go out and do an event, I don't want to slouch out there. I don't want people to sense that about me. So there is an inherent performance part of the job. You're absolutely right. It's more the campaign element than the presidency element, but doesn't totally go away when you're president.
Sorting through your expense tracking, estimated payments, and all those deductions is overwhelming. It might lead to a failure to file or failure to pay penalties that pile up on your tax debt. Here's an idea for you. The attorneys at Tax Network USA have been lifesavers for many. Their team has successfully saved clients over $1 billion in tax debts. Whether you're in the hole for 10 grand or staring at a $10 million debt, they are there and ready to help you. Even if you haven't filed in 1, 5, or even 10 years, the expert attorneys and tax pros at Tax Network USA are equipped to secure the best settlement for you and to help you resolve all tax cases no matter how they started. Go to tnusa.com/Megyn, tnusa.com/Megyn, or call 1-800-245-6000. Contact them now as these tax debt relief programs are expected to change. Again, it's tnusa.com/Megyn, or just call 1-800-245-6000 and tell them Megyn Kelly sent you. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.